Okay, good evening. Before I officially open the meeting, please can I ask anyone here in physical attendance with an electronic device to mute that device. Anyone who's joining remotely, please can you keep your camera and microphone off unless you wish to speak. This meeting may be recorded and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. So, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Standards Committee, including any members visiting remotely. I'd also like to welcome the independent person in attendance, Patricia Richards, and the monitoring officer, Robin Harris, and Billy Attaway from Democratic Services. There's no planned evacuation for this evening, so if the alarm sounds, please make sure that you escort yourself out the building safely to the car park. The lifts must not be used. Is there anyone here in attendance that may require assistance? No. Okay, thank you. We've had apologies from Councillor Mark Last, who is joining online. Are there, and also, sorry, from Parish Councillor Jeff Tutt. Are there any other apologies? No. Okay, thank you very much. Members, are we able to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of September 2024, minute numbers 269 to 273? Are they agreed? Okay, thank you very much. And are there any declarations of interest for this evening? Great. Okay, then we will move on to the first substantive agenda item, which is the government consultation on local government standards regime, and I will invite the monitoring officer to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. So my computer has let me down a little bit and has decided to do an update and then refused to function. So bear with me for a moment whilst I try and get it to work. But in the meantime, can all members clarify for me that they have had the opportunity to read the report that was tabled, and to, in particular, because the report was only really a covering report, actually look at the consultation document itself, either on the attached papers or online? And so the principal thrust of the report was to ask members whether or not they were content to effectively go through the consultation this evening and see if we could produce a response which we would put forward effectively on behalf, as the Standards Committee, but on behalf of Swale Borough Council. And so the first recommendation was in relation to, was the committee happy to attempt to go through that process? And it might be the case that we need to actually look at the document itself and start going through the questions in order to do that, and to treat it as a quite iterative process. And so are members happy to go through the consultation document together, and I will lead through the process, and we'll see if we can reach an agreed decision on it, or decisions on it, noting that if in the circumstances that in going through the paper we find that actually because lots of the questions are yes or no questions that were actually quite evenly split, that we might say, well, actually it's not actually indicative of what we could say is on behalf of either the committee or the council as a whole, at which point potentially we would then abandon the notion, and we would then allow people or members to make their own submissions on the consultation. Is that also sensibly agreed? Excellent. In which case, do you have a paper copy of the consultation? Because my computer's still logging in. We'll start with the. If you're happy to share, and when my computer is back online, then we'll swap into doing that. No, that's all right, because the initial stuff is. Frustratingly, I'd actually started it on the computer and had already gone through all the preliminaries about the bits and pieces that we're doing. So in actual fact, we effectively start on question 2 in relation to whether or not there is actually a decision to be made. And so if people would like me to read out the background to the questions than I can do, but I was hoping that on the basis that people have read the papers and looked at the consultation, we'd simply go straight to the questions. And if the questions in any way confuse us, then we can go back to the context to each question. So question number 2, do you think the government should prescribe a mandatory minimum code of conduct for local authorities in England? Would any member like to propose an answer and speak to it? Councillor Jayes.
Yes.
Sorry, Chair. I've just taken your role away. Sorry. Yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing we're trying to stop.
Councillor Jayes, did you wish to elaborate any further on that?
No, just yes. We should put yes for question number 2.
Are there any other contributions from members on this? Yep, Councillor Hunt.
Yes.
Councillor Winklis. Is there anyone here who does not believe that the government, should be looking at a mandatory minimum code of conduct for local authorities? Bearing in mind we've looked as a local authority at ours as well, so there's been a lot of work put into the principles that sit behind those by the LGA, so there's already been quite a lot that's gone into a lot of the code of conducts adopted by local councils. Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the idea of there being a mandatory code of conduct for local authorities, although I think I would like to see that being written with the LGA rather than it being imposed by central government. I think that it needs to work with the sector.
Yeah, I think a lot of councils, when they do look at their code of conduct, the LGA documentation that's out there is already a pretty good starting point. So working with the LGA on that is probably a good way to make sure that there is input from across local government and various councils that wish to have a say on that. There was also an LGA survey that went out to members, which I did circulate out to the committee, which was an opportunity to feed into what they were collating, to feed into this review as well. So they've also started quite a large piece of work to feed into this. So they are probably well placed to assist with this going forward as well. Councillor Bonny.
LGA is just an association. It's not a government body. I think if you're going to put a proper code of conduct in, it's got to be followed with, if a member needs assistance, that they can go to a place that is not an association, because I'm afraid my past experience of the LGA has been extremely poor. In fact, they don't even respond to phone calls or emails. So when you put something mandatory in place, then you need to have the support network, not a voluntary association, but a proper paid one that will stand in and be the friend of whoever the councillor is. And I don't think it matters whether you're from a large party or an independent. You need to have that backup, because this has a profound consequence on somebody's profession. They don't go into public life, quite honestly, for the fun of it, and you can be hung, drawn and quartered, and that can have a really profound consequence, and that's been my experience to date.
Yeah, thank you. And there is, as part of the consultation, a question around what sort of formal appeals body there could exist at a national level, which obviously, to have that, which in a previous discussion we've had as a standards committee, I think there was quite a lot of members agreeing that having some sort of national clarification around appeals and how that might work, obviously that would need to exist in order to underpin if you were having a national mandatory minimum code of conduct. So, Councillor Bonny.
Yeah, just to come back on that, I think the answer should be yes, but with the proviso that it needs that framework with it. You can't have one without the other. So, when you tick that box, that you then put a comment in.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. Did anybody wish to comment further on any of that? Yep.
Unfortunately, there's no opportunity to comment other than if you respond in the negative, but I think there's probably the opportunity to comment anything else later, and we can add that to the comment for later, but I can't put it in respect to that question because there's no opportunity to do so. Should we move on to the next question? Because that was actually resoundingly yes. But anyway, so question number 3. If yes, do you agree there should be scope for local authorities to add to a mandatory minimum code of conduct to reflect specific local challenges?
Councillor Jays.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if we can take question 3 to 7 and just say yes to them all, unless there's dissent. Oh, there's dissent.
Okay, is there anyone that wishes to... Yep, Councillor Hunt.
I was a little bit undecided on question 3 because what it says is, do we agree that it should be scope to add mandatory minimum code? Now, I agree if there's things to add, but what's not really clear is if you're allowed to add things, can you take things away as well? And how flexible is it actually going to be? Because what you don't want to do is have something that is set out across and then each local authority starts picking bits out and say, well, I don't want that, I do want this. So I think it should be uniform, but the answers aren't going with the question because it says there's flexibility to add to a prescribed code. So I think it has to be no because it needs to be uniform.
Thank you. And yeah, I think my thoughts as well were around if you were to have an appeals body that actually properly supports people, then it becomes quite a challenge if there are wide variations at a local level. That the job of that becomes quite difficult, and then members might question whether it's actually doing what it's supposed to do. Were there any other contributions from members on that? Are we looking at a no response, that it's a prescribed code should be uniform across the country?
Do you want to take a quick vote?
We could take a quick vote on that if that's helpful for people that want to, in agreement with voting, responding no. Those in agreement with that? Okay. People aren't sure, maybe? Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, so I think it just sounds woolly because it says having I agree with having a mandatory minimum code, but I think that local authorities should be able to have some flexibility in addressing specific issues that might happen within their local authority that might not necessarily be impactful in other areas. But I agree with you. I agree with the chair that if there's an appeals body, that any kind of any large deviation from a standard code would increase the difficulty of responding to those situations. So I'm just a bit on the fence about it.
Councillor Bonney.
I can't really think of any instances why we'd want to have a particular local one. It's not like we're on an island where we're all interrelated of 20 people. That would be an exceptional set of circumstances. Yeah, Isle of Sheppey's much bigger, so and got a much broader a population base. But I can't think of any circumstances why we'd want to, unless members can come up with one. Why would you want to tailor it down?
Councillor Jays.
Help me out.
So what I wouldn't want to happen is the government put in place a code and then we wait 10, 15 years for it to get updated. So I think issues could arise, such as I'm sure, well, we know social media's become an issue. Technology's moving forwards, so I think there's got to be that flexibility because we know how slow government act.
Councillor Nundy.
I sort of agree with what Councillor Jay's just said, but the fact that the government won't act quickly isn't a reason to go against that, because they should do that. And if this is based around the law, it's not the law in practice, it's the law as written. I can't think of any circumstances where if there's a minimum code that has been set out, why there would be a need to do it. I can't think of a company or an organisation, because all companies will have a code of conduct, won't they? They'll have, things that they have to do, and they're all basically exactly the same thing. When it says local issues, like to me that would be about, you know, when you looked at a different policy, Swale having such a diverse area, because you've got coast, you've got country parks, you've got urban areas, rural areas, but this is just about standard basic decency and the way that you should behave towards officers of the council, other members of the council, members of the public. I don't see how there could possibly be any specific local issues. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I can't think of any.
Councillor Perkin.
So fundamentally, I feel quite uncomfortable about the centralisation of things, and I feel like local areas should be able to have some flexibility to be able to respond to something that might happen, as Councillor Jay's just said, around like a development in technology, or if there is, you know, a specific flashpoint. And we know that like the government have recently changed legislation around protest, and does a councillor becoming arrested for protesting become an antisocial behaviour issue? Like, would that be a discussion? I mean, that might all be built into the mandatory thing. I just think there's not enough information provided within the consultation generally to be able to kind of make that decision. And I'm just quite pro all organisations being able to have the flexibility to be responsive. And I think if we don't include that, then we lose the ability to respond to situations.
I'll just bring in the monitoring officer at this point.
So just to pick up on a couple of things, I think in relation to what Councillor Hunt said, personally, I think the wording is clear. I think that it is the ability to add to a prescribed code, not to take away from it, and it is to deal with a local issue. And the fact that we can't think of one now, that would mean that potentially Swale Borough Council just adopts that code as it is without changing it. The fact that you have flexibility doesn't mean you have to use it. But there may be a situation that we cannot yet imagine, or that another council is dealing with, that isn't picked up by the mandatory code, that would be helped by having that flexibility. Equally, the final thing I'll say is that unsure is a perfectly legitimate response here. So we can put unsure if we're unhappy with how the consultation is phrased.
Yeah, there is the option to put unsure, and also I suppose there is, if the government's going to the effort to try to produce a standard minimum code of conduct, what would the process be to add to it as well is another question, because if there is to be an appeals body that carries weight, would it need to be added with approval, or would you just be able to add it as members suggest? So again, as Councillor Perkins says, there's not really any detail about how easy that might even be to add to it. If the concern might be that you can just add and keep adding, and eventually by constantly adding you can actually take away from the standard minimum, or is it something that has to be approved, in which case someone has a final say over whether you're allowed to add it or not, and it's not necessarily giving you that local flexibility. So perhaps we do opt for unsure on this question. I don't know if anybody disagrees with that. Okay, who can I have a show of hands if members are in favour of opting for unsure on this? 2. Okay, that's carried. We will go with that option. Thank you.
Question 4. Do you think the government should set out a code of conduct requirement for members to cooperate with investigations into code breaches?
Councillor Nundy.
I would say no, because I think people have got the right to remain silent. People have got as much as the investigation will still carry on, whether that person turns up or not. Yeah. But not wanting to turn up shouldn't necessarily lead to another breach of that code. So I'd say no on this one.
Okay, are there any other members wishing to speak, or does anyone fundamentally think yes on that? So your proposal is that we say no to this question. Yeah. Can I have a quick show of hands on that? And that is a majority vote on that, so we will be opting for no.
Question 5, Chair, I think it's quite simple.
You've said that about every question so far.
Yes, Councillor Jays, I don't think there's any need for debate on question 5.
Does your local authority currently maintain a standards committee? Yes, it does. Should recorded vote as well? Yeah. Should all principal authorities be required to form a standards committee? Slightly academic to us because we have one, but
Councillor Nundy?
Yes.
Councillor Perkin?
Yeah, so I think it's a yes with a further comment that if it provides, good value for taxpayer money, because if it doesn't meet, then there's no point paying for it.
Councillor Hunt?
I also think yes, but if there's a standards committee, you've got a process to be able to go through for it to be looked at by members. If there's going to be a minimum standard set, who does that if there is no committee? And I assume then that would be officers, and you could then get sort of individuals having a little meeting in an office and deciding what they're going to be doing. So it's better to have it as a meeting in open public sessions.
Okay, yeah, member accountability on that. So, anybody wanting to say no to this? Okay, move on.
There is on this particular question the opportunity to add further comments. Would the committee like to add the comment that Councillor Perkin made about it being value for money?
Yes.
Question 7. In most principal authorities, code of conduct complaints are typically submitted in the first instance to the local authority monitoring officer to triage before referring a case for full investigation. Should all alleged code of conduct breaches which are referred for investigation be heard by the relevant principal authority's standards committee?
Just say the options are that yes, decisions should only be heard by standards committees. No, local authorities should have the discretion to allow decisions to be taken by full council. Unsure. Councillor Winklis?
Well, thank you, Chair. It's on this one, I totally agree with the sentence saying it should be heard by the standards committee, because in my view, that's what we've got the standards committee for. We've got a standards committee. I personally think that should be decided by the standards committee, but no doubt there may be some members that disagree. Thank you.
Councillor Hunt. Okay, Councillor Hunt.
Cheers. I think no, because probably if we ask Robin how many complaints there are, that it just can be dealt with quickly, because you could have a standards committee meeting every month just to deal with trivial matters that don't need to be coming to the committee.
Yeah.
The question stipulates referred to investigation, so it's post that assessment.
All right, let me just get my head around that. Go to someone else while I...
Councillor Perkin, then Councillor Nundy. Councillor Nundy.
But mine's more of a question than anything else. So under the current system, because it said, yes, decisions should only be heard by the standards committee. Well, that's fine, but if someone put a complaint in about me, as an example, and that went to the standards committee, and I got found, guilty to have done it, but I wanted to appeal that, where would that appeal go to? Because if that's then going back to the standards committee, is that really fair? I don't know. It's a question more than a statement.
I think that's something that we can come on to later.
So there's stuff about, bearing in mind we're consulting on changing how the system works. And so the system doesn't currently have an appeals process in relation to it. The decision of the standards committee in relation to the conduct is final. And so obviously there are later questions in relation to should there be a mandatory code, and for example should there be sanctions, because the feature of the current system is there are not really sanctions worthy of the name sanction, that then how would there be an appropriate appeal body to deal with it?
Okay, I kind of feel that these questions are quite bad, because question 5, does your local authority currently maintain a standards committee? You can put any further comments. Something like this question, where there might actually be some sensible further comments for us to make about, yes, it should be referred to full council as part of an appeals process. we're not allowed to do that. And it just seems that this is a very loaded, in a way, quite a loaded survey, because we're not able to comment on the things that we actually want to comment on, or might want to comment on.
Councillor Perkin.
So I think going through a standards complaint can be really traumatic for the people that are going through it, whether they perceive themselves to have done something wrong or not. And the decision should be heard by a standards committee would imply it's a whole bunch of people on one committee rather than having a panel. And I think actually the fairness of having a panel is reducing the amount of numbers that are having to be party to that discussion. I think that is fairer for the people that are having to sit on the other side of the standards complaint. I especially feel uncomfortable about it going to full council. I don't see any merit to it, because you're then opening, we all know full council is an inherently political space, and I think that there could have been complaints that would go to a full council that would just be completely inappropriate for it to be, to be in public. And I know we could probably vote for it to be in private session, but that's not included in this question. And B, for it to be used as a political football, and that's not what the standards regime is about. So I'm much more comfortable with saying that we are unsure, and I agree with Councillor Nundy that we should be able to put more response to that, because I don't think it's fair to say we're unsure. I think it's fair to say that we have reasonable concerns about it and we're not able to put any of that in.
Yeah, I think we can add some more stuff at the end, but Councillor Jays, I'll bring you in.
Thank you. So obviously ours isn't heard by the Standards Committee, it's heard by a hearing committee, but we haven't got that option here. And the question, as we've said, is written badly, so its decisions should only be heard by the Standards Committee, but then the full council has discretion to allow decisions to be taken by full council. So it's just so poorly written, really.
Yeah, Councillor Bonney.
And I think the contrary is that actually this should be transparent. So if people are making malicious reports, then it's obvious and it should go to council and everyone should see that. Because I think actually when you have a small panel, it could be politically unbalanced. It's likely to be politically unbalanced, and it could be seen behind as a gross injustice, quite frankly, behind closed doors.
Thank you. Just to help as well, on page 33, there's question 37 just coming to Councillor Nundy's point. There's a bit here about if we do consider there should be a right to appeal, what that might look like. So we can also revisit the point that you raised there. Councillor Hunt.
Just from what Councillor Bonney said there, I think it could also go the other way, though, that if something is heard by full council and that council has an absolute majority of a certain party, you could then go the other way, that they would go on the side of that person just because it's a party that they've got the biggest numbers on. So I think actually it's unsure, because I still do think no, but not just to be able to allow local authorities to have discretion to go to full council. Again, I think there's more information that's needed and more to be said about it.
Yeah, Councillor Miller.
Yeah, I don't really like the idea that something as serious as misconduct, for example, could potentially be turned into a political football. So I do think it should stay with standards.
I think, sorry, Chairman, if you have something that's behind closed doors, then inherently people who are the subject to that can feel that that is can be biased, and there is no accountability. If it's done in public, then, okay, there might be a majority of a political party, but they're going to be held accountable by the public seeing that. But if you're a professional and you've come in to be a councillor, it goes back to what I said on day one, which is you can absolutely kill someone's career and their job. in all of this. And actually, I don't think, quite frankly, councillors should be judge and jury on fellow councillors. It should be completely taken away.
And I think part of this consultation is around having greater sanctions available in the standards regime as well, which makes it even more important that there's consideration given to the best way for standards complaints to be, or investigations to be heard. I mean, question 10 is just a free text box, and I don't know if this is sort of bending the rules slightly, but we just add in there that we couldn't agree to any of the options expressed in this question because we didn't like any of the options, and that there should be greater consultation probably around what that looks like to work out if a minimum is being brought in and greater sanctions are brought in, the best way that that happens, because quite clearly there's a lot of disagreement here. So if members are okay with that, I suggest we hijack the free text box in question 10 and we add the other comments that were raised earlier as well in that, so that they can't ignore anything that's added in a consultation really, and well, they can ignore it all, but if it's written there, it's at least in there somewhere. So if that's okay, we'll do that.
Does that mean we're putting unsure for question 7 and we're going to comment? Question 8, do you agree that the independent person and co-opted members should be given voting rights? And that's yes, this is important for ensuring objectivity. No, only elected members of the council in question should have voting rights, or unsure.
Councillor Hunt.
I absolutely think that independent persons should have voting rights. For that very reason that we said about, where you could have a bit of bias going on with members, having someone completely independent being in there, I think does help. And when it comes to the vote, that is even more helpful.
Okay. And any other members wishing to speak in agreement or disagree? Councillor Bonney.
I mean, it depends on what the vetting process is. Is it going to be the same or is it going to be different? We don't know how that independent person's brought about other than our current system. So do we know of any changes? And you can't really decide the answer to that question until you know that. So I think we have to put unsure, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I suppose we are speaking from somewhere that has independent persons, but it's not necessarily the case. And Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, I completely agree with Councillor Bonney that it's really difficult to answer that question. I also think it depends very largely on like what happens, what the outcome of question 7 is, because actually if the independent person is being required to report to full council, then should an independent person have voting rights at full council? It's very different to having voting rights at a panel. So, and expecting an independent person to be available for full council. And I think, yeah, we just don't know enough information to make that objective decision.
So I think, again, we add that into the free text box where we say that we were unsure because there's greater clarity needed about question 7, and it also is dependent on how independent persons are appointed. Okay, next one.
Question 9, should standards committees be chaired by the independent person? Yes, no, unsure.
Councillor Jays.
So I'm unsure of this. It might stop members who have been in front of a panel and have rulings against them. It might stop them trying to bully, victimise, or just direct hate at panel members.
Anybody, anything to add? Any further comments, Councillor Perkin?
I think we're elected to take up the roles of chairing these kind of committees, even if they're difficult. And I think actually abdicating that responsibility would be wrong.
Councillor Hunt?
I wouldn't say yes or no, but also wouldn't say unsure. I'm just not really. Yeah, I'm not bothered either way. If it was an independent chairing or if it was someone else, it's whatever really. But obviously, I can't say that. Or just not answer it at all, maybe.
Yeah, so it's yes, no, or go with the flow. Any other contributions from anyone? Is it anybody wedded to the idea of us putting a particular answer to this? I presume we don't have to answer them all.
I've not experienced or experimented with not answering the questions, and when we hit continue, it'll tell us whether we have to answer it or not.
Be a gamble if we then lose all our previous answers.
At the minute, I would, based on what's been said, I think we're in the realms of unsure because we are not fixed one way or the other.
Yep.
Even given Councillor Hunt's fourth option.
Yep.
Should we? I'll not mark anything on it at the moment, and we'll go for box 10 because there's various comments that obviously people would like to put in box 10. Perhaps trying to keep it to a length slightly shorter than War and Peace if we can, and then I'll click continue and we'll know whether or not we have to put an answer in or not. I'm going to start off with box 10 just with the sense of the room that we just don't feel there's sufficient information provided in the consultation to answer these questions effectively, yes or no. I think that was the main thrust of it. If anyone wants to give any specific points, I'll then put them in.
So we do have the additional part about what question was it? About being required to form a standards committee. So that's question 6, which was that it needs to provide good value for the taxpayer.
That comment's in because there was a free text box.
Oh, there was for that one. So we're going rogue on questions
7, 8, and 9. We're
7, 8, and 9.
If we want specific comment.
So on 7, that was where we were unsure because we didn't like either of the yes or no options, and that there should be greater consultation on what those options could look like if we are to proceed with a minimum standard code of conduct and to progress at looking at greater sanctions. And on question 8, there were points raised about how independent persons are vetted and appointed before we could give an answer to that. Were there any other comments? Question 10 is, if you have further views on ensuring fairness and objectivity and reducing incidences of vexatious complaints. Councillor Perkin.
So I think if there's going to be a minimum mandatory code of conduct, there should also be an accompanying vexatious complaints policy, because I think that having to write your own one might not, like if you've got a mandatory minimum code of conduct, then you should have that as a subsidiary.
Any other contributions from members? Does anyone disagree with that? No. Okay, so we would like to include that there should be a vexatious complaints policy that goes alongside any mandatory minimum code of conduct. If members would like to look ahead at question 11, which is, should local authorities be required to publish annually a list of allegations of code of conduct breaches and any investigation outcomes? You can read the options there for yes and no. Councillor Jays.
Thank you. I think no, but in the free text box underneath, I think the system we've got now where we get an annual overview of what's, you know, it doesn't name members, but it says what sort of things have been complained about. So I quite like the system we've got now.
Okay, Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thank you. As Councillor Bonney's already said, the potential to absolutely ruin a career over this I think it's a slippery slope. I'd personally have no problem if they had been found guilty of wrongdoing, but allegations, I think it's dangerous.
Any other contributions? Sounds like we should just say other views, do what we do on that one. Words to that effect. Question 12 is, should investigations into the conduct of members who stand down before a decision to continue to their conclusion and the findings be published? Not really sure it makes sense, but Councillor Hunt.
I think so. It should be published, because if something, if someone has done something that shouldn't have been done, and they've got to the point where they've stood down probably because they know that it was wrong, at that time that person has been elected publicly by people, and they should know what's happened during that time when they were in public service.
Councillor Jays.
So I'm unsure. I agree that it should be continued in a way, but also obviously it's a cost of continuing it. You know, you've got officers' time in here, independent person's time, and obviously any investigation officer we need to appoint. But also you could have someone that stands down sort of 5 months before an election and then re-stands, and you don't want them to get away with it. Or they could even stand down and re-stand in the subsequent by-election. So we've got to have protection in place, but also it could clear people's names. I know a parish councillor who stood down because of complaint. I don't even think the monasteries didn't even take the complaint up, but he stood down because, like it's been said here, you know, it can ruin careers. They just didn't want to deal with it, and I'm sure they would have been cleared. So I'm unsure.
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, for me, it's pretty similar to question 11. Obviously, yes, I do think it should continue to be investigated, but the findings be published, well, only if they're found to have done wrongdoing. I don't think it really changes the fact they've stood down. If they stand down and they're found to not guilty, if you like, then no, I don't think it should.
Councillor Bonney.
If they've stood down, it depends whether they can still take part in the process. Because if you're standing down, it might be because, quite frankly, like you say, you know, it might be unfounded, but you've just had enough and it could ruin your career. If then the process against you, you either don't take part of because you're no longer a member of the council, or there is no right of appeal, you actually feel that that was an unjust process, and there should be some sort of policy or way of complaining against that, you've got no right of comeback. I think it's quite a difficult one, and I get it. You know, it depends on the circumstances, but that again, you know, this is we are elected, paid a nominal sum, yet it can have a massive impact on someone's career. And I think that it might be that for whatever reason that they don't want to deal with it anymore, quite rightly. But if they feel that process hasn't been fair and they have no right to take part in that process if they stand down continuing, then I don't think you should be publishing a report.
Councillor Hunt.
But I think what this question is saying, though, is that those members stand down will have to continue to the conclusion, so that they will still be part of the process, because it's members who stand down before a decision continue to their conclusion and the findings published. So it allows them to remain and be questioned and be part of that investigation, from how I read it.
I think you need to see the wording in the process as to how that works.
Councillor Jays.
Thank you. I think we've also got to think of the stress it puts on some members, as we've seen in the past, and also ill health. I think that's got to be taken into consideration. Someone might, become unwell. We probably wouldn't continue in that circumstances if they stood down. So there's too many unknowns, I think.
So I think there's obviously some views expressed where it's almost like this could be seen as a loophole by some, but for others there will be valid reasons, personal reasons for they might be doing, taking the step that they take. I suppose as well, the point about whether you would then be entitled to appeal something when you've stood down as a member is an important consideration. Are members in support of us putting unsure on this? Yep. Any dissent? No. Okay.
Shall I continue? If question 13, if responding as a local authority, what's the average number of complaints against elected members that you receive over a 12-month period? I can assist members with that. In the last 3, if you take an average over 3 years, it's 12 complaints. If you take an average over 5 years, it's 16 complaints. So if you want to take any or either of those figures, please speak now or hold your peace.
Councillor Jays.
I think we should go over the 3 years because I think we had an exceptional circumstance 5 years ago.
You're not wrong.
Anybody disagree with that? Agreed. Okay. Question 13A.
So again, this is effectively just ones that come from the stats, but in relation to complaints made by officers, in actual fact, I think prior to last year there were none. So again, you're looking at on the average over a 3-year period to be consistent with the answer we previously gave. Then of the 12, you're basically looking at 3, 3, and 6 and 0 as the answers. If people are happy with me to use those answers as the stats, what they provide.
Yes, please. Thank you. Councillor Jays.
I don't know if it's right to say it's almost disappointing that there has been complaints made by officers. Officers should feel empowered to call out bad behaviour, but there is that fear, and it's a shame. Personally, I'd like to have seen at least one, but I understand why officers might not feel they could have done that.
Anybody else on this?
So, question 14, if you currently work or have worked within a local authority, have you ever been the victim of or witnessed an incident of misconduct by an elected member and felt that you could not come forward? Again,
I think we skip that.
I think that's because we're responding as a body.
I think we also skip question 15. Unless you were responding as an individual, I don't think that we would answer 15. Likewise, 16. We can come to question 17. In your view, what measures would help to ensure that people who are victims of or witness serious councillor misconduct feel comfortable coming forward and raising a complaint? Any contributions on that? Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky question to. I think it's a really tricky question to answer. I think it depends on lots of various different bits of information about your own resilience around how well you may or might not be supported by your party or your group. I think as well, in terms of coming forward, there has to be the understanding that something will be done about it. And I'm really supportive of some of the kind of discussion about, you know, let's have a think about what sanctions could look like. Because at the moment, if you've been really, really treated appallingly as a member by another member, the peak thing that can happen is for them to apologise in public. And I don't think many people would want to come forward if the outcome is someone just apologising to you in full council. It doesn't really feel like a conclusion to that issue.
So there's a suggestion there, which is an enhanced sanctions policy. Any other contributions, Councillor Hunt?
I think it's a difficult one, but I think in some cases, even if people knew that it would be anonymous, because if you are talking about councillors and getting an officers, for an officer to know that they'll be able to come forward and it's not put out there that their name and everything, obviously they need to be known by somebody who's part of the investigation, but some sort of anonymity there could be helpful in some situations.
Any other contributions? Councillor Bonney.
I think that's quite tricky because I think in most circumstances they're going to know who it is because it's normally going to be quite a select group of people. So, but I hear your point and I understand it.
Councillor Nundy.
I think there's several things that might help victims come forward. I think Hannah touched on it in that knowing that the process is actually going to be worthwhile is probably quite important, and not just, you know, like Councillor Perkins said, you know, an apology in full council. That's not really that's not setting the world on fire, is it? But I think having a culture of change rather than a real culture of change and a real culture of accountability rather than a culture of blame would probably be quite helpful. Because certainly what I found through being a trade unionist for quite a number of years now is that when someone makes a mistake or they do something wrong, I think them feeling comfortable in coming forwards and actually admitting that they're wrong is probably the most important part of that process. But I don't know what the staffing arrangements are like at the council. I don't know if there's staff support, but certainly if an officer feels that they're being mistreated by a member of the council, they need to feel comfortable coming forward, and I think supportive management is really important there as well, and actually supporting someone through it rather than just saying, oh, you can put a complaint in but everyone's going to know about it. I kind of feel that having that culture of change and actually having something in place where it's not just a case of you say sorry, you have to sort of prove that you're sorry, because you can't do that, but actual remedial action. So saying, oh, we're going to send them on this training course, we're going to ask them to complete this, we're going to try and introduce this, would probably be more helpful, and actually so that people do feel comfortable coming forwards. Because I think it's really, really difficult if you think that you're being bullied to come forward, because if you then get labelled a grass or whatever, you're going to be a lot less likely to come forward later. So I think we need to put something in there about councils not just having a standards committee, but trying to actually work towards a culture of change and a culture of accountability rather than pointless finger pointing, because that doesn't change anything.
Okay, so there's a contribution there around the organisational culture and how you reach resolutions on that. I can hear typing away, that's been captured. Councillor Jays.
Thank you. I think the most likely time, as we saw with the last complaint that went to panel, the only time an officer's like to complain is on the way out, because there's no fear once you've left an organisation. So, but we don't want that. We don't want it to be you have to leave to feel confident to make a complaint. So that's another tough question.
Yep.
When the point about anonymity came up earlier on, it crossed my mind that whilst anonymity is very difficult because people are likely to know the incidents and the circumstances once they read into the complaint, which they have to be able to read into the complaint, and there's obviously a natural justice point around that as well. But would members agree with a comment about being able to complain by proxy, i.e. a third party making the complaint on the behalf of the person who was being impacted?
Any comments on that? Councillor Nundy.
I think that is really important, but going back to what I said earlier about resolution, does it always need to go to a full-on investigation with someone coming in? If it's a really minor thing, I think it's far. But I know, obviously, yourself, Robin, will look at complaints and try and resolve them before. But I think that should be the absolute onus of this: is it not getting to that stage, because bullying is very rarely a one-off incident. It's generally a pattern of behaviour. And yes, I think that having by proxy would, because someone else, you know, if I was being really abusive towards Billy or whatever, not that I would ever do that, just to be clear, but if someone else stepped in and said, oh, I don't think the way that Councillor Nundy is behaving is appropriate, before it's actually reached the point of it being that pattern, that really traumatic pattern of behaviour, it's already been dealt with. So yeah, I would absolutely support by proxy complaining.
Okay. Anybody disagree with? Agreed? Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add? Move on to the next section, which is question 18. So this is about introducing power of suspension. Do you think local authorities should be given the power to suspend elected members for a serious code of conduct breach? Councillor Miller.
So it's just more of a question. So, for instance, if I was arrested or charged with an offence, the council, would they have the power to be able to remove me as a councillor, or would I have to? Well, would they have to rely on me being absent in the chamber? Because I find that crazy.
Under the current arrangement, we don't have the power to suspend. Councillor Hunt.
I think we should have the power to suspend, but bringing in question 19 and 20 all into the same thing, because there is that problem with how residents are then left when they've got no councillor that's in place, and especially when you've got a one-member ward, they're absolutely left with nobody that's actually doing it for them. I think that with question 19, whether it's a standards committee or independent body, I think it should actually be the residents. So the council should have the power to be able to do it, but it's down to the residents. The same with an MP. If they put in so many numbers and requests that MP is kicked out, a word. But it should be up to residents. The council's got the power to do it, but the residents will put a petition in to say that they want that person removed once it's come out that. So yeah, and I think then 20 as well is all tied into the same thing, because you do need a point of contact. But who then also do you have? Is it another member that you're then putting on? It shouldn't be officers, it should be someone. So I think it all comes down to what residents want.
Councillor Jays.
Thank you. So I was unsure when I first looked at this. I think it should be a different authority, such as like a national standards body that can suspend. I wouldn't want it to be a political tool, but perhaps it should be a recommendation from a standards committee to sort of a higher power, higher authority. But we haven't got anything like that at the moment.
Councillor Perkin.
I think what fundamentally I find difficult about all of the suspension questions is that I'm quite pro the ability to suspend people if they've done something heinous. But I think within the questions saying serious breaches of the code of conduct, like what does that actually mean? Like where's the bar before somebody gets suggested for suspension? And within the consultation document, it talks about the disbarring, and I think we'll come to that later on. But I think there would need to be much more information about where the bar for suspension would be. And I think it actually all pins back to that kind of decision that we were unsure about whether there should be a minimum code of conduct with flexibility or not. And a lot of that kind of pins on earlier questions. And I think that Councillor Hunt's point is relevant about the fact that councillors are elected to represent the public, and it could be kind of if you're not clear about what the bar is for suspension, then somebody could get suspended for something like having an antisocial behaviour order, having gone to a protest and been arrested. Like, there's no mechanism for discussing whether the public are happy with that or not, and I think that's a real issue. But I'm not against the principle. Say if someone was, up for some kind of like sex crime, then I don't have an issue with there being some discussion around suspending that person. So I think it's yes, but where's the line? We don't have any information again, which is a real shame, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think some of the discussion that has been around before is where someone is being investigated or has been convicted of a criminal offence rather than a code of conduct breach. And obviously if that then becomes a code of conduct breach, we don't know yet because the minimum code of conduct's not been agreed yet. And there's also what you are suspending them from. Are you suspending them from committee meetings? Are you suspending them, just from attending meetings? Are you suspending them from engaging with officers and other members? Even in the preamble, it's sort of talking here about the option to withhold allowances, institute premises and facilities bans. They're all things that we don't have under the current standards regime, which aren't a full-blown suspension of being a councillor. So again, it's giving us no option to put, a sort of, there's no free text box option on that one. But Councillor Nundy.
Just a question. So in the preamble to these questions, it says the law disqualifies certain people from being or standing for election as a councillor. So if someone did get a custodial sentence of more than 3 months, is that automatically they're not allowed to be a councillor? Would that have to go to a committee? Is that automatic?
Yeah, that's a disqualification from being a councillor, full stop.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Perkin.
Sorry, I think there's also a really important point around being innocent until proven guilty, because if you've been charged with something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've done it. And so if you're suspended because you've been charged with something, that is adding an additional potential remuneration discrepancy. And I think there's a lot to be considered about how that is fair on those individuals.
Councillor Hunt.
I think, although there isn't a free text box, there is on question 19. And some of those things I think can be put into that one because it's all part of the same, I think.
Yeah, I think in that free text box in question 19, I think we should say that whilst people are open to the idea of having additional powers along those lines as part of the standards regime, it would require greater understanding about who applies those and what is within the scope of those as well, and how there is a determination around what threshold is reached to trigger those. And we can put in there as well that we discussed a form of right to recall for local government representatives. It doesn't mean that we're all in agreement with it, but we have discussed that. I think it's a thing worth flagging that it exists for MPs, but it doesn't for us. Councillor Jays.
I think it'd have to be like a flow chart, and have they repeatedly bullied, or just to sort of get to that level. So yeah, I think it's sort of yes or no routes, and then is suspension needed because of this? Yes. So I think hopefully the government will give us something like that if we are to go down them routes in the future. But I think it will hopefully be rare, such as actual having a standards panel meet. I was less than once a year since I've been here, so thankfully.
I've completed the free text box on question 19 with the questions or the comments that have been made. However, are we going to put anything in terms of the substantive answer for 18, 19 or 20? You go 18, are we going unsure?
Unsure, yeah. I think on 19, I mean, the options around the appropriate body that has the power, again, I think that sort of feeds into unsure, because we've added in there that we would want to know some greater clarification and consultation around the degree of powers and therefore who has the ability to use them. And it does also go back to the point about having a body to appeal, I suppose, as well.
Does that mean we're going unsure on question 19 or not answering it at all, just leaving the text box as the...
I think it's unsure, unless anyone disagrees. I don't think anyone knows the answer or suggests an answer because of 18. Councillor Hunt.
I agree with 19 being unsure, but I'm not sure about question 18, because I think from what everyone said, I think maybe it could be yes, but it's the unsure bit is into 19, but maybe just need a show of hands on that one.
Okay, who is in favour of saying yes to question 18? So we've got 3 in favour. Who wants to say no? And who wants to say unsure? So I think in the free text box we can say, whilst nobody was opposed to authorities being given the power to suspend members, then follow with the rest of what we have said.
I've put the committee is open to the idea of suspension and other punitive powers, but need to understand what is a serious breach.
And then question 20 is going back to Councillor Hunt's point, which is what happens in that person's absence while they're suspended. Again, do we want to answer that? Just open that up if anyone has anything to say. Councillor Jays.
Happy to go with yes.
Councillor Nundy.
Yes.
I said yes, but again, it's the detail again. Who is that going to be? Because you put it onto another councillor, or do you put it onto an officer, and what then accountability publicly is there and things. So I don't think it is a clear yes, but it's also not a no, and it's not an unsure, because there's just not the information there to know what it will be.
Councillor Nundy.
I think it absolutely should be the council's responsibility to put somebody else in place. But I do agree that that's a really the options there are really unhelpful. But I think if you're going to, if the council's going to suspend somebody, I think it's up to them to backfill that councillor's workload and put someone up. But I can understand, because if you had a 2-seat ward and they're both opposing parties, so you're then going to say, well, you've got to deal with that because that party candidate has done this or whatever. It's very difficult.
I think we've got an answer then there by the sounds of it, which is along the lines of, yes, in the instance that these powers are there, then there needs to be something in place, but we're unsure in the unsure box, this is where we go with that we're unsure we're unsure about either of the 2 options there put forward, because we'd need to know more about what that actually looks like in practical terms.
I have abused the free text box in 19 with these comments.
I think any other comments on those? No. Length of suspension. These questions, question 21, if the government reintroduced the power of suspension, do you think there should be a maximum length of suspension? And there's 2 yeses on that one. Councillor Jays? Yep.
I think yes with the top one, but we haven't got a free text box. If we had a free text box, I'd put, but with the option of recall petition.
Councillor Nundy, did you indicate?
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. 6 months sounds about right, but I still think that should be that. Once again, if there was a free text box, you could put in that decision would have to be reviewed every 28 days. Because situations change. So if somebody got charged with something, but the investigation was still going on, but then the police dropped those charges, the investigation would still be ongoing. Would you could then review that and bring them back while the investigation continued?
I think we need to keep our minds focused on what we're talking about is suspension for a breach of the code of conduct, not a suspension that came about because of criminal activity.
Sorry, I get carried away sometimes.
Councillor Perkin.
I think that's a fair comment, but to challenge it, the only way you would be able to suspend someone who has been charged with something, because you can't no one gets chucked off the council unless they get charged and sentenced for more than 3 months. So the only way that you would be able to address someone being charged with some form of criminality would be a breach of the code of conduct, right? So there would need to be, from my view, if someone is being charged with something, there is a reasonable chance that can bring the council into disrepute. But there's also the fact that they are innocent until proven guilty. And at this point, people are, court cases are taking 2 years to even be heard. So that 6 month maximum might be completely irrelevant if a code of conduct, if there's a decision the code of conduct has been breached because of a criminal charge. I agree. I know that happens very, very rarely, but what I would not feel comfortable about is suggesting that we're only comfortable with a 6 month maximum if a top level thing did happen. So if you're going to get suspended for 6 months for saying something rude in a council meeting, then that's a completely different kettle of fish than a 6 month maximum for someone who has done something that is so bad that it brings the council into disrepute because they've been involved in criminality. And I think they're not separate from each other.
Councillor Hunt.
I think that we should also go further with the 6 months, because this just seems to be a suspension, and then after 6 months you can come back and just carry on doing what you've been doing before. But if they're found to be a breach that's something serious, for instance, bullying a councillor, bullying an officer, or anything a lot more serious but not criminal, it should really, I personally think, be an indefinite one, because you can't be seen to being acceptable at any point with some instances and then being allowed to come back 6 months later and deal with that. I think there should be a point where you say, actually, you shouldn't even be a councillor and you've done something so bad, you're not coming back, and then having a by-election or whatever, so residents do get a chance to have someone better in place.
Yeah, I think later on there's a bit about disqualification, but Robin?
I'd say you may have seen in the press relatively recently that a councillor was convicted of harassment to the criminal level of harassment against officers, and was imprisoned for a period of 18 weeks and therefore was automatically disqualified by virtue of a custodial sentence. And so I think there is a thing to think about in relation to what we're talking about, is the standards regime exists, if you like, between low-end rudeness that we have to put up with in life and genuine criminality, and we are in that, frankly, slightly odd space between mild offence that we all deal with in our everyday lives through people just not having time for other people, and actual criminal behaviour. And so again, when we're talking about this power of suspension, yes, you say that it would be in the realms whereby you are talking about ongoing bullying of an officer over an extended period of time, but not necessarily to the criminal threshold, would potentially merit a suspension of up to 6 months. But we're not talking about harassment, say, to criminal standard, because you would say this isn't a standards matter, it's a police matter, let's take this to court, like that previous council did. And indeed it was found to be actually quite serious harassment, because actually 18 weeks custody for harassment is a a serious sentence for it.
Mm.
I sort of feel that it's a bit of a cop-out when we just say unsure and they don't allow us to elaborate. But I think on that one, I think we are just unsure because of all the various caveats. There's certainly no agreement behind anything, even though they did give us 2 yes options. Any comments on that? No, I don't think we can get behind one of those options. So,
Next question is
if
I still think we should answer question 22. I know we haven't put yes, but I'd like to put infrequently. Let's ignore the...
let's see if we can do that then. If one of the yeses, then it moves on to part B, which is withholding allowances and premises and facility. Did anyone want to say anything else on 22, by the way, before we move on? No.
As I say, currently I have put infrequently because of Councillor Jay's comment, albeit we didn't answer yes one way or the other, but everyone happy with them infrequently?
Yeah. Okay, withholding allowances and premises and facilities bans. Question 23. Should local authorities have the power to withhold allowances from suspended councillors in cases where they deem it appropriate? Councillor Jays.
Yes.
Anybody? Councillor Hunt.
Yep, I agree. If you get allowances for attending the meetings to different things, if you're not going to be at meetings or doing anything, you shouldn't have any allowance.
Yeah, and I suppose the public optic of suspending someone but on what they would consider full pay is probably not a great confidence builder in a new standards regime. Anybody have anything else to say on that? Councillor Bonney.
I'm just wondering, and I totally agree with that, is what the legal position would be, but that's for them to sort out, isn't it? We're just doing the moral response.
I think the advantage of being the government is you get to write the law, so if they say it's legal, isn't it?
Yeah, this is, in effect, this is to inform what legislative changes they would make, so they would have to accommodate that somehow in their legislation. Question 24. Do you think it should be put beyond doubt that local authorities have the power to ban suspended councillors from council premises and to withdraw the use of council facilities in cases where they deem it appropriate? Councillor Jays.
Yes.
I hear lots of yeses on that. That's a simple yes. They only gave us 1 yes on that one. Question 25. Do you agree that the power to withhold members' allowances and to implement premises and facilities bans should also be standalone sanctions in their own right? So that's without suspension. Councillor Jays.
Yes.
I heard a no as well. Anybody wish to speak? Councillor Perkin?
What? I just feel dodgy about it. Like, if you're not suspending somebody, why are you taking their money away from them? Like, I don't... Surely having a ban from premises and not being remunerated is worse than being suspended. Sure, you'd be suspended in that situation.
Councillor Miller?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Perkins on this. I think that they should only be used in, obviously, really serious, the most serious cases, and I don't feel comfortable about them just being standalone.
Councillor Jays.
If the armed forces can take away members' pay, then why can't we?
There's also an interesting point here where, again, they only gave us 1 yes, 1 no, and unsure, where you may wish to say that there's a premises ban. I'm just putting it out there, but not withholding someone's pay, whereas this is bundling them up. There could be reasons for why you might wish to limit someone's access to something as part of what you've... Councillor Hunt.
But then that would come back to where I was saying that you get allowances for coming to meetings. If you've got a premises ban, you're not coming to meetings, so then you shouldn't have your allowances because you're not doing that job. If you're there for doing the ward work, that's part of what is seen as a more of a voluntary thing that you're doing, and it's those attendances that you're getting allowances for. So if you're not here, you can't.
Presumably, it could be, you know, a facilities ban which says they're not allowed on the council premises except for meetings or something. I don't know. I'm sort of on the hoof here, but yep. Robin?
In relation to facilities, it could be, for example, not allowed to use the council's Wi-Fi, because you could imagine a situation whereby a councillor is using their council laptop and the council Wi-Fi to use their betting account, and that's not really an appropriate use of council equipment. And you can probably imagine other less salubrious uses than the example I gave, but.
Yeah, I do remember watching a full council meeting where, not here, in another borough, someone was playing Candy Crush and checking their stocks and shares, but you can't necessarily say that's not inappropriate, so you can't stop someone doing that. Councillor Winklis.
Thank you, Chair. I would come down on no on this because if we're going to state outside law, someone is innocent until proven guilty. And I think as Councillor Hunt said just now, maybe suspended for the premises for various different reasons that might have come to light pending the hearing, but if they're still doing their ward work, they are still basically working for the council. So in my view, no.
Councillor Jays.
And there I was thinking Robin was going to mention tractors in the House of Commons, but I'll leave it there. I do think in one of the last 3 cases that have gone to panel, I think this would have been an appropriate sanction. So I think we should have the power. They're rubbish at the moment, aren't they? You know, you've got to apologise, or it's going to get reported to full council. And some of you had to sit through 4 hours for that to be the resolution, or longer. So we need more sanctions, and this should be one of them.
So, yes, I'm sort of don't want to put it to the vote because I feel like they should have given us a free text box. So, can we have an indicative vote of those who think yes?
Can I vote for Councillor Numbers?
That might be question 42. Who is on no on this? And who's unsure? I'm unsure. I don't like that it's bundled up, to be honest, but
Can we just uniformly reply that the consultation?
yes. Maybe on question 26, free text box, we say we've got nothing to say on this. However, question 25, I think that's a no on this, but obviously people can also go on and respond as individuals, but we've obviously not reached a yes as a committee. So question 26, so we're moving on to interim suspensions. Do you think the power to suspend councillors on an interim basis pending the outcome of an investigation would be an appropriate measure? This one allows us a free text box. Councillor Jays.
I think yes, but what it doesn't make here is that, you know, it should be used rarely, but an example would be if someone's been bullying a member of staff, abusing a member of staff, to be able to suspend them and keep them out of the building away from that member of staff would be a good measure. So I think yes, but sparsely.
Yes. So again, if we were allowed on question 25 to say that sport facilities ban or premises ban is an independent, individual, standalone thing, you know, maybe we can get that into the free text box. Councillor Miller.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. For me, a suspension is a punishment, and I don't think I'd like to see the outcome of an investigation before punishments are enforced. Thank you.
Councillor Jays.
ACAS state that suspension is a neutral act.
Councillor Hunt.
I also think, yes, again, for those same reasons, that if you've got something that's along the lines of bullying or something, you should be suspended. If it was a company, you would be suspended while the investigation's ongoing. So, sorry? Yeah, that's it, yeah. So it's just suspended while the investigation's because you need to possibly take those people away from each other, so there's nothing happening.
The free text box isn't any further comments, so does that allow us to say yes and further comments? So can I get an indication of people who want to say yes to this answer about powers to suspend on an interim basis, and who is falling on no? Who's not sure? We haven't got an unsure, but it doesn't stop us saying, however, Councillor Perkin.
I'd be happy to support yes, but there should be, in the free text box, we could put that there must be a really strong distinction between someone who's been suspended without prejudice and someone who's been suspended by the council as a punishment for something.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I don't know whether people want to sort of put in there that as part of this, separating out whether somebody is... No, just scrap that. So I think that there's agreement on that, subject to those comments being added. Anything further anybody wanted to add on question 26? No. Question 27. Do you agree that local authorities should have the power to impose premises and facilities bans on councillors who are suspended on an interim basis? Yes, no, unsure, no further comments. Councillor Nundy.
I think they should have the power. See, I'm unsure on it because I do think that the problem with giving the council's power is that power can be abused, and it could be used for nefarious reasons. But I think the option, from an objective point of view, I think that the option should be there, because if you're suspending somebody from their duties for an interim basis, what reason would they have to come to the council premises? What reason would they have to use the facilities apart from working on any defence or applications for a judicial review or something like that? I can't. For premises, yes. Facilities, I'm not sure, because they might need to use those facilities to research.
Does anyone? Councillor Jays?
I think yes.
Councillor Hunt?
Just going back to the original report, what we've been asked, there's so many unsures and different things. Is it the point where we say individuals should do it? Because if we're just coming up with so many unsures on each question, is it right that we actually do it as an authority?
Well, I'll bring you in a moment. I think there is broad agreement on a range of the thrust of this government consultation around having a more standardised code of conduct that's mandatory, that obviously there is appetite amongst Standards Committee for greater sanctions. I think it's important that that's expressed by the authority. Obviously, there's always going to be differential ideas amongst us all around the extent to which they apply or how they apply. But I think it's important that we are able to put that forward. And I also think it's an important opportunity for us as a committee to discuss it, to also aid in, if you wish to make separate submissions or if you want to go back to your group members as well. I still see value in us continuing with that. There's not that many more questions. I don't want to keep you here all evening. Councillor Jays.
I think we've got this far. We should continue because we're all having such fun.
Does anyone want a second? That no, never mind. I forgot where we were. 27. Did we have a show of hands on this one? I'm forgetting that. Show of hands for yes. Show of hands for no. And who's unsure? All right, we're unsure on that one. Next, 28. Do you think councils should be able to impose an interim suspension for any period of time they deem fit? Councillor Jays.
Are you bored of coming to me first? I think yes, but it says council. Should it not mean standards committee or... the whole idea is we don't want things being abused. You know, it may work fine here, but we're not just talking about ourselves, we're talking nationally. We're also talking, we don't know what's going to happen in 4 years' time, or even 2 years' time. So I think yes, yes.
You think yes, but it's a standards committee decision?
Well, I mean, so obviously it takes 5 days for a standards committee to be able to meet. So without our crystal balls, which Billy hasn't provided us, it's really hard because, like I say, 5 days for a standards committee to meet. I suppose in the interim it'd be sort of between yourselves. There's just so many unknowns, said Donald Rumsfeld.
Councillor Hunt.
I think no, because if you're leaving it completely open like that, you could say, well, I'm going to do an interim suspension for 20 years and just not do anything about it. You could just suspend someone and just not deal with it. So I think it does need some sort of time limit on there to be able to deal with it.
Councillor Bonny.
I mean, in theory, you'd only, if an interim suspension is something so serious that, you know, it's probably going to be criminal, isn't it, if it's that serious? Mm. In which case, actually, we shouldn't be acting, it should be in the power of the police. If it's that urgent and that...
I'll just bring in Robin, then Councillor Perkins.
So we sort of talked about that a little bit earlier on, didn't we? Is that obviously, again, we are talking here about code of conduct
Yeah,
complaints.
absolutely.
And so... for what it's worth, and it's your response, not my response, but actually I don't think it's appropriate for any period of time, because actually then where is the onus on the investigating body or whoever it might be, whether you put it out, whether you're doing it internally, to actually come up with a response. And so for me, actually, if you were to have an interim suspension, which again is going to be the most egregious of code of conduct cases, but not ones that are necessarily criminal at this point, then the fact that you have that power of interim suspension shouldn't mean that then you then get to abuse that, because you can then just delay the process indefinitely in order to keep that person away. So I think that actually if you had a maximum length of interim suspension, that would be of benefit, because it would mean that an investigation and process had to be completed within a reasonable period of time. My personal view.
Yeah, so I think no to interim suspension, in my view.
Councillor Perkin? No. Seems like we've come down on no, but I'll just get a show of hands for no. Okay. Councillor Hunt.
I was going to say, I think if we can add those comments, though, of why we're saying no, because of that long period of time. And
yep, and it puts a time on the investigation to be concluded. Question 29. Do you agree that an interim suspension should initially be up for a maximum of 3 months and then subject to review? Councillor Jays?
No, I think it should be initially for 28 days or until the conclusion of the investigation. But after 28 days, it should be reviewed and then, if necessary, continued.
Councillor Nundy?
He took the words right out of my mouth.
Anybody else wish to speak? Anybody not like that suggestion? So that would go into the free textbooks, but can I just get a show of hands for yes on that? Anybody in favour of that? No. And anyone just want to do a blanket no with nothing in the free text box? Anybody just think that's just a big no? No. Okay. So any further contributions either in support of that suggestion by Councillor Jays? Councillor Perkins?
I agree with no, but I think there's no point being prescriptive with it, and I think that like a maximum of 3 months is just something randomly picked out of the air. So
Okay, so sounds like we just go for a no on that, even though there are different suggestions about what the alternative could be. Question 30. If following a 3-month review of an interim a standards committee decided to extend, do you think there should be safeguards to ensure a period of interim extension is not allowed to run on unchecked? I mean, sorry, but I was just going to say, yes, there should be safeguards, but that's just plucked out of nowhere, but I'm sure no one's against there being safeguards. No. Question 30A. What safeguards do you think might be needed to ensure an unlimited suspension is not misused? Does anyone have suggestions? So, Councillor Nundy.
I think if they're suspended while there's an investigation going on, I think whoever's conducting that investigation would need to provide some real accountability to the standards committee as to why the investigation has taken such a long time. Because there could be a variety of reasons. People could be on holiday, and that's probably quite a justifiable reason for not interviewing someone if they're not in the country, or they're in Devon or wherever they choose to go on their holiday. That's up to them, I suppose. But you can't have a situation where someone just hasn't bothered to complete the investigation. So I think some sort of accountability checklist, like Councillor Jay said earlier about having a flow chart, would need to be in place. And if there are no reasons, then that person should then be held to account as to why they're dragging their heels, quite frankly.
Councillor Perkin, did you indicate?
I think that there should be like there should just be a framework around it, like what should be expected of a standards review, how long you should expect that to take, and ways that you should be able to push for that to be quicker if it is deemed to be unacceptably long. So I think there just needs to be a really good framework around it.
I think we can combine those and they sort of reinforce one another as well. If that's okay. Were there any other comments from anybody? Anyone have any burning desires for a particular safeguard? Nope. Next section, question 31. Do you think councillors should be disqualified if subject to suspension more than once? I thought we had 3 yeses then, but we only have 2 again. Yes, twice within a 5-year period should result in disqualification for 5 years. Yeah, just come from nowhere, I think that. Yes, but for a different length of time and or with different time frame. No, suspension is enough. And any other comments? Councillor Nundy.
No, because once again that could be used as a political tool where people could make vexatious complaints, knowing that if that complaint leads to somebody being suspended twice or in a certain time period, a certain amount of times, they would automatically be disqualified, which is quite unfair.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree that suspension is probably enough, because anything beyond that is... Yeah. Anyway, any further comments? Yep. I'll bring you in then, Councillor.
I actually think it goes to Councillor Bonnie's point that she made earlier on in relation to at what point are you dealing with something that's criminal, and it goes beyond the level of the actual standards regime.
Councillor Perkin.
I think also there's a question about the parity across different levels of government, because you don't get this level of scrutiny and this level of punishment if you are found to be in breach of parliamentary code of conduct, or the House of Lords, or if you're a police crime commissioner, or potentially if you're a metro mayor. So what is the government's rationale for not creating parity across all levels? Why is it just local government that's facing this kind of level of scrutiny? And I just think it's really important to feed that back to the government, because it seems like local government is being held to higher standards than national government, and we should all be held to high standards, but everyone should be held to the same standards.
Okay, I think that's a fair comment to add in. And there could have been a second no, which is looking at the right to recall at a local level. So they could have given us 5 options there, but they only gave us 4. Yeah. Question 32. Is there a case for immediate disqualification for gross misconduct, for example, in instances of theft or physical violence impacting the safety of other members and or officers, provided there has been an investigation of the incident and the member has had a chance to respond before the decision is made? I think they could come up with everything. But, sorry, Councillor Bonney.
Sorry, isn't that kind of goes back to if it's criminal or not? That should be, shouldn't it? If it's physical violence or theft.
So I'm assuming that they're looking at this from the perspective of the current rules around disqualification. So let's say that it is a matter of theft, but there was an immediate guilty plea and it was a first offence and there was some sort of underlying mental health crisis that had happened, and the person gets 240 hours community service rather than a custodial sentence. So they are a convicted thief, but they haven't met the threshold for disqualification. I think that's kind of where it's coming from with this, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense, because if they've got 5 years for ABH, I think it's the maximum for ABH, 2.5 years for ABH, you're disqualified anyway, so it's irrelevant. So
I think it then comes back to whether it's that option or there is a standards complaint then made about them under, if they think it's also breached the code of conduct. Councillor Jays? No. Okay. Is that just, can I get a show of hands for yes? Show of hands for no? Show of hands for unsure? Okay, we're going with unsure. Then this is something that has been a topic for conversation at a previous standards committee, so just indulge slightly on this one, but this is next section's about appeals. I think we've already broadly agreed that yes, there should be some sort of appeals mechanism, but question 33, should members have the right to appeal a decision to suspend them? Yes. So we are in agreement on that. Question 34, should suspended members have to make their appeal within a set time frame? And then it gives yes, within 5 days, or yes, but within a different length of time. Yes, in days, number box. No, there should be no time limit for appealing a decision. Councillor Hunt, then.
I think it needs to be a different time frame, because if a decision is made at a point where, for instance, a member's on holiday for 2 weeks, they're not going to necessarily be having time to come up with something to go through that process. So I think it does need a different length of time. What that is, I'm not sure.
I think it means we have to give one as well, which is just daft. Councillor Nundy.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Councillor Hunt said. I think it should be 21 days.
Don't know if we... Oh, it's annoying that it's...
The reason that I said 21 days would be to account for 2 weeks of holiday, but also potentially some staff work shifts. So actually being given 5 days, well, if you're on shift for the next 7 or 8 days, you're not going to be able to... You're not going to give that your full... And I think, you know, the right to appeal any decision, to at least have one stage of appeal, is absolutely fundamental to procedural justice. And I think maybe 21 days, if everyone else is happy with that.
Councillor Jays.
I like 21 days. I just looked on the ACAS website, and that's probably where the government's got the 5 days idea from. But I was thinking 14 days, but I'm more than happy to go with 21 days.
I'll lower to 14 if it'll get everyone else's support.
17.
Councillor Hunt.
I think it needs to be more than 14, because it's generally, if people are away, you've got the 14 days plus you need then time once you're back and things. So I think it needs to be more, but 21 does sound good.
Let's go with 21, but we will express here, and I will send a video clip in, that we aren't happy that we had to put a number on it. Were there any further comments? No. Okay, 35. Do you consider that complainants should have a right of appeal when a decision is taken not to investigate their complaint? Councillor Nundy.
Yes.
Anyone want to say no to that? Can I get a show of hands for yes? No? Unsure. Okay, let's split on that one. So I think that means we go unsure, unfortunately. Did anyone wish to add anything on that? Councillor Perkin.
I think it just depends on who's hearing the appeal, doesn't it? Like, if some, like, yeah, it depends on too much stuff to make a yes/no decision.
That's fine. Question 36. Do you consider that a complainant should have a right of appeal when an allegation of misconduct is not upheld? Councillor Jays.
Going along with the ACAS model, no.
Councillor Hunt.
I agree, no. I think if the investigation's all been done and then you come up with that conclusion, you can just keep going round with that one, so no.
Just quickly, before I bring you in, Councillor Nip, question 37, I hadn't read, was actually just a free text box answer, which is if you answered yes to either of the previous ones, you can add... It's all what wants your suggestions, but just going back to the point that we had some people say yes to 35 and unsure, we could add a comment in there about that some people had considered that it could be something that should be permitted, but there's not enough information to sort of make a decision with a yes or no answer. I think it's fair to say that. I'll bring you in, Councillor Nundy.
Yes, it's a question about the question, do you think a complainant should have a right of appeal when an allegation of misconduct is not upheld? Well, obviously, as Councillor Jays has said, if you look into ACAS, no, and Councillor Hunt said you could just go round and round in circles for months on end with it. But am I right in thinking that if a complainant didn't feel that the process that was used or that the evidence didn't match their decision, would they currently have the right to take the council to a judicial review on it?
I'll defer to the monitoring officer.
So are you talking about question 35, a complainant should have a right of appeal when a decision is not taken to investigate their
36.
complaint? Sorry, no, so 36, when an allegation of misconduct is not upheld. So there, basically, any decision of a public body is susceptible to judicial review on the basis that there has been an error of law or it is, for example, irrational. So when we say that there isn't a right of appeal, what we're saying is there's not a right of appeal to a standards body in relation to that. But if you can point to a procedural irregularity such that the decision also would be unsafe, then you would have recourse to a judicial review.
Which therefore would be sort of like an appeal, wouldn't it? In a roundabout way.
It is a roundabout way of appealing the decision.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I get a show of hands for no on that answer then? Question 36. Okay. That's a no. Were there anything else that anybody wanted to add to 37? It says if you answered yes to either of them, but on the second one we didn't. But yeah, yeah, we've got the comments that we discussed here. Councillor Jays.
The national standard body that the government are going to make after all of this. I've looked into my crystal ball and I know the answer.
Anything else from anyone? No. 38. Do you think there is a need for an external national body to hear appeals? Councillor Jays.
Unsure. Yes.
Anybody else wish to speak on that as a yes, no, or any further comments? Councillor Perkin.
So there was one previously, and I don't think it was very good. So I'm I don't know if I'm pro or against having a national appeals body. I think if it's a national appeals body that works properly in an effective framework, then yes. If it's just another talking shop situation, then no.
Is anyone just of the view no appeals cases should be heard by an internal panel? So anyone support an internal appeals process? No. So I think we can say yes, but in the any further comments that it's got to be underpinned by a respectable framework.
I've put if it was a properly formulated body that worked effectively within an appropriate framework.
Okay. Any comments? No. We're good to move on. 39. If you think there is a need for an external national appeals body, do you think it should be limited to hearing elected member appeals, be limited to hearing claimant appeals? Both of the above should be in scope. Councillor Jays.
Because of the way we answered question 36, I think the top one, limited to elected members' appeals.
Anybody else have any other differing views that it should be claimant appeals or both? Any comments of anyone? Can I get a show of hands for limited to hearing elected member appeals? Okay, that carries for that option. And then final question 40. In your view, has this been a very long... in your view, would the proposed reforms to the local government standards and conduct framework particularly benefit or disadvantage individuals with protected characteristics? For example, those with disabilities or caring responsibilities? And the options are: it would benefit individuals with protected characteristics, it would disadvantage individuals with protected characteristics, or neither. Councillor Jays.
We don't know. The crystal ball's broken on this one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an important consideration to make for people to feel they have confidence in this. I'll bring in Councillor Perkin and Councillor Nundy.
So I think if there is incidences of discrimination, then if you have a protected characteristic, having more faith in a system to be able to do something about that is a benefit to that person with that protected characteristic if they are being unfairly treated because of and on the basis they have a protected characteristic. So I think, yeah, it would be a benefit to make things more effective in terms of responding to those kind of situations. But if it was just an average, we've had a bust up between councillors, then it has no real potential impact on that. So I think there's probably some neutrality, but in specific situations, having a more effective standards regime is helpful for people with protected characteristics.
I think that's a fair comment that we can utilise the free text box for. I think anything that we sort of allow greater confidence as well that something will be taken seriously, which is clearly something that a lot of people don't feel at the moment, and perhaps means that people also don't come forward with stuff. I think that's something that we should make clear in that. Does anyone have anything further that they want to add? Are we all good? Okay, that is the end of that item.
I just say, so obviously, in relation to the two recommendations of the report, it was to consider whether we could respond to the consultation, which obviously we found that whilst we were unsure on some things, that we have fundamentally done a response which I think meets the views broadly of this committee. And the second point was for you to give me delegated authority to complete the form, which actually I've been doing as we go along, and I just need to submit it if you're happy.
So, yes, can I just get a show of hands to support those so that we can realise we've not wasted the evening? Yep. Okay, that looks unanimous.
Have we got a proposer and second on that?
Do we need a proposer and second? I suppose we do. I'll propose,
Second.
seconded by Councillor Jays. Then just item 6, which is DBS checks verbal update. This is just to bring back to the committee because obviously it's something that we've taken forward, that we've received DBS checks from 25 councillors. They're 26 councillors. So we're 21 outstanding. I don't know if members want to say anything about what we might want to do in terms of encouraging more to come forward. Are there any? I'm happy to sort of write to group leaders just to remind them this is something that we obviously took through and it's been adopted. So just to again to encourage members to come forward. Councillor Winkless.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was agreed, as I understand, I was at the full council meeting where we agreed that elected councillors would have a DBS check. Now we've had, is it 25 have done it? I don't want to know the names, obviously you wouldn't be in a position to divulge it. But I think the other 21 firstly should join the other 25. Because to me, in this meeting here, I'm going to say, why haven't I not basically done it? I'll say no more.
Councillor Jays, sorry, and Councillor Hunt.
I think we shouldn't let members sit on this standards committee if they haven't got a DBS check, but I also think we should name and shame at the annual council meeting, and that gives 3 months for members to pull their fingers out.
Before I come to that, Councillor Hunt.
I think there is also some things with members that are, say, at KCC, for instance, that have got DBS checks and they're thinking they're not needed for this. I think it just needs some clarification that if you have got them, and of those 21, how many have got DBS checks that they don't then need to get it? Because it may be that not all of them actually need it, and which is why they haven't come forward. But we need to know if there's a list of them that have said that they have got it, because if they've just ignored it and said, well, actually, we don't need to bother, we need to know that information.
I think officers have made clear as well to them that people can provide an existing one. It wasn't a requirement that they undertook a new one per se, and obviously it can be reclaimed through expenses claim as well. So hopefully finance shouldn't be a barrier to people. Councillor Perkin.
So I think, as with many things that can be reclaimed, you do have to have the money to front that originally. So I think there is some discussion that probably needs to be had around that. I also just firmly disagree with naming and shaming people who have not decided to sign up to something which is not legally. It's not a legal requirement as a councillor to have one. I appreciate I'm being big L liberal about this, but it's not a legal requirement. It's not within the constitution that not having one would bar you from any kind of committee, and if that is something that the council wants to do, then that would need to go through as a constitutional amendment rather than it being randomly put in by a committee.
Thank you. I'll bring in Councillor Bonney, then Councillor Jays. Councillor Bonney.
Yeah, I had a pang of guilt this afternoon, realising I'd seen your email and not done anything about it. So I applied at 5:30 this afternoon. I might have been listening to another call, but I did do it whilst, and it's come through this evening. So it's taken 3 hours, although it tells you 10 days. So it is pretty quick.
Councillor Jays.
So my concern was when you mentioned people can bring in ones from other organisations, we wasn't allowed to debate this at full council. It was moved straight to a vote, which I think was very disappointing, as it's such an important subject. But the council voted that way. Obviously didn't want to hear from their standard members. And now I've lost my train of thought because I went off whinging.
It being from another organisation.
Oh yes, so
I was listening.
Good. I'm glad someone was. I wasn't. So it depends how old they are. I think that was a safeguard I wanted put in place. So when I brought my one in, it was 3 months old from a different organisation, and it wasn't just a basic one; it was more enhanced one. There's lots of us involved with different charities where you have to have DBS checks. So I just think there should be a time period. I mean, I was disappointed the fact that it's once every term rather than every 2 years, annually. I wanted to see more protections, but I don't think I had a point. I just wanted to moan.
Well, you did have a proposal, but
No one seconded it.
no, I was going to say I don't think that's one for now, but I will just write out, obviously, to group leaders just as a reminder. I do understand that people can miss things sometimes or intend to do something and then other things get in the way. So I do understand that. Councillor Jays.
If naming and shaming, I know we've got to look at this at a different time, but if naming and shaming isn't welcome, perhaps it could be, say, there's 7 out of 8 in this group, or I don't know. It's no. Well, I still like the idea. How else are you going to kick these people up the backside to get moving?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. There's nothing underpinning it, but it was an expressed will that we would like members to do that. I've obviously been provided information, but I deliberately haven't gone through who has and who hasn't, and I have group splits as well, and I haven't used that this evening, but I will send a reminder round, and obviously I can keep the committee updated and how we are progressing with that. Was there anything anyone else want to say on this item 6? No? Okay. Thank you very much, members, for spending your evening with me filling out the consultation. That was a very enjoyable exercise. Meeting's closed at 9 p.m.